Sigma males are not your average men. They don't chase approval, don't follow leaders, and definitely don't care about fitting in. These men walk their own path, often outside the rules of society. You won't find them trying to dominate a room or begging for attention. They'd rather stand alone than kneel for acceptance. You already know all that. But here's a deeper question. Who can actually bring a Sigma male to his knees? Who or what could ever humble a man like this? Not society. Sigma males don't care what the world thinks. Not other men. They don't compete. Not failure. It doesn't faze them. Even heartbreak doesn't shake them for long. The truth is, very little in this world can reach the core of a Sigma male. Their mindset is built like a fortress. Cold, sharp, unshakable. That's what makes them so rare and honestly so powerful. But what if I told you there's one thing that can humble a true Sigma? Not a person, not a moment, not even a loss. It's God. See, the Sigma male lives life on his own terms. But there comes a point, for many of them, when they run into something bigger than logic, bigger than confidence, bigger than self. And that's where things shift. This video isn't about breaking a man. It's not about turning him into something weak. It's about the one force in the universe that doesn't need to control him, manipulate him, or shame him to create change. It's about real power, eternal power. The kind that doesn't demand obedience, but invites surrender. Because for the Sigma, true humility doesn't come from outside. It comes from within. And sometimes that shift only happens when they encounter something truly divine. That's what this is about. Why only God can humble a true Sigma male. The Sigma mindset, strength and solitude. To understand why Sigma males are so difficult to humble, you have to understand how their entire mindset is built. A Sigma doesn't just decide to be independent. He is independent. It's in his wiring. From a young age, many Sigmas realize they don't quite fit in. They're not interested in playing group games or following the crowd. They think for themselves, act on their own, and often feel more comfortable observing from the edges than standing in the center. This leads to a deep sense of self-reliance. Where most people seek community to feel safe, Sigmas find peace in solitude. They don't fear being alone, they crave it. Because in silence they gain clarity. In isolation, they build discipline. In distance, they find strength. It's not about being cold, it's about being in control. They learn early that the world is unreliable. People lie. Trends change. Systems break. So instead of depending on anything outside of themselves, Sigmas build an internal foundation. One that isn't shaken by chaos. One that doesn't collapse under pressure. That's why they're often misunderstood. People think they're arrogant, distant, emotionless. But in reality, they're focused. They've trained themselves not to react emotionally, not to chase validation, and not to expect anyone else to understand them. They live by values, principles, code. This makes them incredibly strong, and also incredibly resistant to change. You can't shame a Sigma. You can't pressure him. You can't lure him with status or scare him with threats. He doesn't care about your approval, and he definitely doesn't need your permission. But that strength has a blind spot. When you're used to handling everything yourself, it's easy to believe you don't need anyone, that you're fully in control, that your willpower is enough to carry you through anything. That's where the ego sneaks in, quietly, without warning. Not in loud, obvious ways, but in subtle thoughts. I don't need help. I've got this. I'm enough. And while those beliefs make a Sigma powerful, they also make him unreachable, until someone bigger enters the picture. The challenge of humbling a Sigma. So let's get real. How do you even begin to humble a Sigma male? Most people use pressure, shame, or emotional manipulation to control others. But none of that works on a Sigma. You try to call him out publicly. He doesn't care. You try to guilt-trip him. He walks away. You threaten to take something from him. He already prepared for that. This is a man who's trained his mind to detach from outcomes. That's what makes him so rare and so hard to reach. You can't use approval as a tool because he doesn't need it. You can't use fear because he's already accepted solitude. You can't use power or money because he doesn't chase status. A Sigma male lives outside the social game, and that's the problem for anyone trying to influence him. There's no leverage, no emotional button you can press that he hasn't already disconnected. Even failure doesn't break him. If he loses a job, a relationship, or even a reputation, he adjusts. He doesn't beg, panic, or fall apart. He adapts. That's part of the Sigma DNA, relentless adaptation. In fact, trying to humble a Sigma from the outside often strengthens him. He doesn't see obstacles as attacks. He sees them as tests. And each time he survives one, he becomes even more self-assured, more mentally locked in. But here's where things shift. All of this strength, all of this resilience, it comes from within. And as long as the Sigma believes he's the source of his own power, he's operating from ego. A quiet ego, but still ego. So if you want to humble a Sigma, you can't come at him from the outside. The world has already tried and failed. The only way to truly reach him is by showing him something bigger than himself, something his mind can't outthink, something his heart can't ignore. That's where God comes in. The spiritual wall. When the ego meets the infinite, there comes a moment in every Sigma's life when the self isn't enough. It might not be dramatic. It might not be loud, but it hits hard. A moment when all the control, all the independence, all the discipline suddenly doesn't work. Not because the Sigma is weak, but because he's finally facing something that can't be solved by logic or force of will. This is the spiritual wall. It can look like a quiet emptiness, a sense that no matter how much freedom he has, something is still missing. Or maybe it's a moment of awe, watching a sunset, standing on a mountain, holding a newborn, and realizing, I didn't create any of this. I don't control any of this. For the Sigma male, this realization isn't easy. He's used to being self-contained. But now he's facing something infinite, something divine, something that doesn't need him, but still invites him. And that confrontation? That's where humility begins, because in that moment, the Sigma starts asking questions he's never asked. Why am I here? What's beyond me? What if I'm not the source, but part of something greater? These aren't weakness. These are awakening. See, the Sigma ego isn't loud like the alphas. It's quiet. It hides behind strength, solitude, and control. But when the divine shows up, when God enters the picture, all of that gets exposed. Not in a humiliating way, in a freeing way. Because suddenly, the Sigma sees the truth. Being strong isn't about carrying everything alone. It's about knowing when to let go, when to trust something higher, when to admit you're not the highest power in the room. That's not defeat, that's wisdom. And for the Sigma male, wisdom is everything. That's why spiritual encounters, deep faith, and moments of divine clarity are often the only forces strong enough to humble a true Sigma. Not to break him, but to awaken him, to pull him out of self-reliance and into purpose, a purpose that comes from the one who created him. Why only God can humble a true Sigma? Now here's the real question. Why is it that only God can humble a true Sigma male? The answer is simple and deep. Because God is the only force that operates completely outside the systems a Sigma has already mastered. God isn't part of the social hierarchy. He isn't tied to human approval, money, control, or ego. Everything the Sigma male has built his identity on, logic, discipline, freedom, inner strength, none of that can compete with the power of the divine. A Sigma resists man-made authority, but God isn't man-made. He's eternal, infinite, beyond comprehension. The Sigma is used to being the observer, the one who sees through the games, who can outthink the system, who refuses to be played. But when he comes face to face with the creator of the universe, there's no game to observe, no system to hack, just power, just presence, just truth. And in that truth, the Sigma realizes something most men never see. All his strength, all his resilience, all his independence, it was never just his. It was a gift, a loan. something breathed into him by a source greater than himself. That's why God can humble him, not through fear, but through revelation. Not by crushing him, but by showing him what's real. It's not about control. It's about alignment. When a Sigma male finally sees that everything he's ever achieved, every moment of clarity, every bit of strength, it all came from a divine source, he doesn't lose confidence. He gains clarity. He finally understands that real power isn't independence. It's connection. Connection to something holy, something eternal. Something that doesn't need him but still chooses him. This doesn't make the Sigma less of a man. It makes him more. Because now he's not just operating from willpower, he's operating from purpose. He's not just resisting the world, he's walking with the one who created it. That's why only God can humble a true Sigma. Because only God can reach that deep. Only God can speak to the soul without yelling. Only God can break down walls without violence. And the beauty is God doesn't force it. He waits, patiently, until the Sigma in his silence starts to listen. And when he does, everything changes, not overnight, but deeply, permanently. That's what true humility looks like. Not weakness, not surrender to a system, but alignment with the Creator. And once the Sigma sees that, he's never the same again. The transformed Sigma, humble but not broken. So what happens after the Sigma meets God? Does he stop being strong? Does he lose his edge? Does he turn into someone soft or easily controlled? Not even close. In fact, this version of the Sigma is stronger than ever, because now his strength isn't coming from ego, it's coming from faith. His independence isn't rebellion, it's clarity. He's not just walking alone, he's walking with purpose. He knows where he's going, and more importantly, he knows why. Humility for a Sigma doesn't look like submission to people. It looks like recognition of truth. It's not about lowering himself, it's about lifting his vision. He no longer has to carry the world on his shoulders. He knows he was never meant to. He still doesn't care about attention, still doesn't follow trends, still doesn't need approval. But now he also doesn't need control, because he trusts in something greater. And that trust gives him peace that no mindset, no tactic, no self-help book can ever deliver. The transformed Sigma doesn't lose his fire. He sharpens it. He doesn't abandon solitude. He uses it to hear God more clearly. He doesn't stop being silent. But now his silence is full of purpose. And when he speaks, it's with truth. Not just personal truth. Eternal truth. That's what makes the humbled Sigma a powerful force in this world. He's not just moving against the grain, he's moving with divine direction. He's not just strong, he's spiritually grounded. And that combination, that's rare, that's dangerous, that's world-shifting. So if you're a Sigma male, or you know one, understand this. The world may never be able to humble him. People may never break through. But when God steps in, everything changes. Not because the Sigma becomes weak, but because he finally becomes whole. So, what did we really learn here? The Sigma male, independent, untouchable and self-powered, might look like the final form of masculinity. A man who doesn't need others, a man who answers to no one, a man who walks alone and never flinches. But even the lone wolf has a soul. Even the strongest mind meets its limit. And when that moment comes, when the noise fades and the world gets quiet, the Sigma male starts to hear something deeper, something higher, a voice that doesn't demand but invites, a presence that doesn't control but calls. That's where God steps in, not with force, not with fear, but with truth. Because at the end of the day, every man, Sigma or not, is still human, still created, still wired for something more than just survival and strength. He's wired for purpose, for connection, for meaning that doesn't come from within, but from above. So if you're watching this as a Sigma male, or someone who relates to that mindset, here's the challenge. You don't have to give up your strength to find humility. You don't have to lose your edge to gain faith. You don't have to bow to the world to stand before God. In fact, it's in that moment, when you recognize the limits of your own power, that your next level of strength is unlocked. Not through force, but through faith. Not by breaking, but by awakening. Because true power doesn't fear surrender, it understands it. And true Sigma males, the real ones, they aren't afraid to go deeper. They aren't afraid to face the infinite. And they definitely aren't afraid to admit that maybe, just maybe, they weren't meant to walk alone forever. Thanks for watching. If this hit you on a deep level, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below, let's talk about it. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more content that speaks truth, cuts through noise, and hits harder than the algorithm ever will. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and stay walking with purpose.